As I'm recording this about 5 minutes ago, a friend of mine on Facebook informed me that the game show legend born Winston Conrad Martindale just passed away today at the age of 91. Wink Martindale hosted more game shows than any other MC in the history of American television. And I first remembered him as a little kid hosting Gambit, which was on CBS from 1974 to 76. It debuted the exact same day as The New Price is Right with Bob Barker, which Barker hosted for 35 years, as well as The Joker's Wild starring Jack Barry. And however, really the first time I really got acquainted with Wink and started watching religiously was Tic-Tac-Dough, which debuted on CBS in the summer of 1978. That was the first version I remember. I just love the show. Wink's charming personality, his corny jokes, the fun game itself, the sound effects, and just the gameplay were just something to behold. And while the CBS version didn't do that well, it only ran for about 8 weeks in CBS daytime, it came to primetime that fall, and it ruled primetime game shows. Tic-Tac-Dough, Joker's Wild, which a year earlier had been syndicated after about a year of repeats of the CBS version. So Wink Martindale and Jack Barry were the top game show hosts. This was before the whole Wheel and Jeopardy phenomenon that began in the mid-'80s. These guys ruled the roost, along with Richard Dawson of Family Feud. And Wink also hosted many other game shows before that. He was also a radio personality. He got a start in his small town of Jackson, Tennessee. That's where he was from originally. He was the very first TV personality to interview Elvis Presley. And even though Wink never did interview Elvis again on television, he remained good friends with the king of rock and roll. In fact, Wink's second wife, Sandy, his wife now of almost 50 years, dated Elvis before she and Wink met each other, and both were good friends of the king of rock and roll. I'd recommend Wink's book. It's called Winking at Life. He wrote it back in 2000, and he's got all these great stories that I couldn't even tell you. Just so much, a long life lived. And in Los Angeles radio, he came to Southern California sometime in the late 50s, early 60s. When he first came to Los Angeles, he was on KHJ Radio 93, which at the time was a middle-of-the-road station. And he was there for about a year. Then in 1960, there was something that happened that is very, very rare. I'm not sure if it's happened before or since, but they made a trade of morning DJs. The morning man at KRLA 1110, Perry Allen, wasn't crazy about rock and roll. Wink Martindale, on the other hand, was the one who gave Elvis his big break on TV. And so KRLA and KHJ switched their morning man. They made a trade, and Wink became the morning man at 1110, and he was the host of the Wink Awake Club. He did that for about 2 years, and then he resigned from KRLA to become the vice president of Dot Records. But that didn't last too long because he wanted to get back into radio, and he got back to the number one radio station at the time, KFWB Channel 98. He was mornings at KFWB from 1963 till about 1967 or so. Then he went to KGIL 1260 for about 3 years from 1968 to 71. He worked twice at Gene Autry's legendary radio station 710 KMPC, the Station of the Stars. He was there from 1971 to 79 and again from 1983 to 87. He also co-hosted the short-lived Wink and Bill show on KABC Talk Radio 79 with his very good friend Bill Smith, who was his best man at his wedding. And Bill Smith was, for a very long time, part of the KTLA Morning News, and before that, KTTV's Midday News. And Wink was also on The Music of Your Life, and that's where I first met him. And this guy put together a show like you wouldn't believe. And the DJs on there were all great. They would have these wonderful stories when they did their tracks, but Wink went the extra mile when it came to preparation for the show. He had a reel-to-reel with all these archived interviews he did with legendary musicians as well as actors and actresses. And he spent a long, long time on that whole process. It was just, I'm wondering, he probably spent at least 2 to 3 hours a day on a 3-hour show. That's how involved he was in that. In regards to the game shows, after Tic-Tac-Dough, he left the show, even though it was still on, to host a new program that he had created himself while drinking a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper. It's called Headline Chasers. And Merv Griffin picked it up. It was one of the few game shows that Merv didn't create that he produced, although it only lasted one season. After that, Wink hosted High Rollers, which had previously been hosted by Alex Trebek, and then he hosted The Last Word. Also, around the time High Rollers came on, Wink created a game show that was on the USA Network. It was produced by his company, Wink Martindale Enterprises, in association with Barry and Enright. He worked with Mark Maxwell Smith. Originally, Wink was going to call it License to Steal. He told me this in an interview a couple of years ago for the book I'm writing on Jack Barry. But Mark Maxwell Smith said, let's call it Bumper Stumpers instead. And it was a 3.5-year hit on the USA Network. Very fun show. You can find some episodes on YouTube. Also, Wink has a YouTube channel where he presents rare game shows, episodes that haven't been seen in years. So if you haven't done so already, subscribe to his YouTube channel. Now, actually, I have to correct myself here because I first met Wink Martindale at the signing for the second edition of the Encyclopedia of TV Game Shows. That was in December of 1995. And I said, "What's new?" He says, "Well, I got a new show called Debt coming soon to Lifetime TV." And sure enough, 6 months later, there it was. It lasted for about 2 years. I think the best remembered contestant on that show was somebody who was the champion, and he answered all 10 questions in 60 seconds to have his debt of about $10,000 paid off. And they went for the double or nothing, where he had the chance to not only have the debt paid off, but also win that amount in debt. So basically, he'd leave the show $10,000 in the black. And his category of expertise was Weird Al Yankovic. And he answered correctly, got so excited that he ripped off his toupee, threw it on the ground, and did a river dance around it. And as the credits rolled, you saw the security guard on stage, a big burly guy with a shaved head, pick up the rug and try it on. But I think the best remembered contestant on any Wink Martindale series was Tom McKee on Tic-Tac-Dough. He was there for 46 days, and I over 40 days, and he won 46 games. He won about $310,000 in cash and prizes, and he and Tom and Tom's wife, Jenny, kept in contact with one another over the years. They lost contact in the early 90s, but then in 2006, there was a Tic-Tac-Dough reunion at the Game Show Congress in Burbank, California. Tom McKee was there, and Wink hosted a special Tic-Tac-Dough featuring Tom McKee as well as my friend Joe Van Ginkel. They played one game of Tic-Tac-Dough, and it ended in a tie. Now, after the game was over with, Tom McKee was gifted with a special prize. They gave him a DVD of the movie that was the answer to the question that ultimately lost him his championship. But it was a great time. Tom and his wife Jenny donated about 15% of their winnings to Wycliffe Bible translators. The cool thing about it was he said also that Eric Krepling, who beat him and himself won about $80,000 in cash and prizes, also donated some of his winnings to Wycliffe Bible translators. And Wink is survived by his wife of nearly 49 years, Sandy, 3 of his 4 children, many grandchildren, and many great-grandchildren. And the last couple of years, he had moved into the desert and was doing work for a radio station out there until recently. He also was involved in the history of rock and roll. For the podcast about a year ago, I interviewed Gary Thoreau, and Gary told me that Wink was the current host of that legendary program that was originated by Bill Drake. And even for the radio station I work for, Wink did a retro show going back to KRLA when he was on that station back in the early 1960s. So he took a KRLA Tundex chart, and Wink also added a couple of songs that he thought would be good for the list as well. And in his book, Winking at Life, he talked about the faith he had as a little child. And when he took a trip to Israel with his wife, Sandy, he rededicated his life to Jesus the Messiah. And so rest in Jesus, Wink.